Naim from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and I have the honor and privilege of chairing and moderating these interesting sessions. Minister Patriota is on his way, and he will be here shortly, but we decided to go ahead and start the session. Those of us that have been coming to Davos for many years remember in 1999 when we had a session about Brazil, essentially explaining the debacle that was going to happen and the very, very difficult, challenging situation in which Brazil was under. We have come a long way. Brazil has come a long way since then, and it's easy now to list Brazil's achievements, forgetting what were some of the horrible initial conditions in terms of macroeconomic instability and all sorts of problems, many of whom continue to exist, but the progress has been undoubtedly short of miracles. Brazil today is a very attractive country in a variety of ways. It has made incredible progress in alleviating poverty. About 32 million people were lifted out of poverty. That's the size of a country, of an average country in a lot of places. Even more impressively, Brazil has managed to lower the inequality. It still continues to be one of the most unequal, socially unequal countries in the world, but the trend is moving down towards less inequality. That's a very, very difficult achievement that not a lot of countries are able to perform. So there are many good news. Brazil, however, continues to be challenged. Recently, Brazil was the victim of an ecological accident. The mudslides and rains created a tragedy in which more than 800 people died. Our condolences to the people of Brazil for this tragedy. And at the same time, that coincides in time with a transition when there is a new government, there are new challenges, and there are new opportunities to discuss about Brazil. To present that, we have a very interesting group of people that are in charge of sustaining the Brazilian miracle. We have the president of the central bank, Alexandre Tombini. Welcome, Mr. Tombini. Continue to the Brazilians. I have Renato Augusto Vilela at the end of the group, who is the Secretary of State Finance for the government of Rio de Janeiro, of the state of Rio de Janeiro. I have Freddy Curado, who is the CEO of Embraer, one of the world's leading aerospace companies. We are waiting for Antonio Aguiar Patriota, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and representing the international community and to ask interesting questions about how the international community perceives Brazil. We have Vikram Pandit, who, as you know, is the CEO of Citi. The numbers are amazing in a variety of ways. It is estimated that in 2010, Brazil grew by 7.3%. That did not happen in Brazil since the 1970s. Benedes, and I forgot to introduce Luciano Coutinho, and I apologize, the president of Benedes. He is the president of a bank, Benedes, that in disbursement last year had more than $103 billion. Just to give you an order of magnitude, this is 5 times more than the World Bank. So Mr. Coutinho manages a bank that is not just a Brazilian operation now, but it also has major international operation. And as I said, is larger than the World Bank. In Rio, Rio is faced, well, first, an interesting case in which Rio is now, the government of Rio is an investment grade, has gotten investment grade. Which is not common among subnational governments in Latin America, certainly, and not in the world. And also, they are faced with the challenge and opportunity of hosting both the World Cup and the Olympic Games in a few years. Let me start with what we're going to do is just have a first round of questions and comments, and then get to your point on comments and questions to the panelists. And let's start with the macro situation. and with the president of the central bank, Mr. Tombini. What is in everybody's mind is how to manage the miracle of massive amounts of money coming into the country. You are, like many other countries, receiving an inflow of foreign investment that is generating, is appreciating the currency, is creating challenges to which you have responded, the government has responded by imposing certain controls. And tell us, how does it feel and what are you doing in terms to manage the inflow of money and to manage the challenges that that poses?
Thank you, Moises. Good morning, everyone. I'll try just to recap some of the features of Brazil today. I think today, to understand the success of the Brazilian economy, you have to see, first of all, we have a policy framework which has been tested for the last 10, 11 years that combines a clearly set inflation targeting regime that established our commitment to control inflation. Combined to that, we have a floating exchange rate that has helped us during this period to absorb external shocks and to have a flexible response to international events. We have compounded that with the accumulation of foreign reserves, especially in the 2000. We came from a very low position. Now we have over $294 billion in international reserves, which has done away with the vicious circle that we used to have in the past, which was the public sector with a net debtor in foreign exchange. We have fiscal policy over these years that put the debt to GDP ratio in a clear downtrend. We have organized our public finances. So this is the policy framework that we have enjoyed for the last 10 years. It has been tested in a very different and challenging environments. Combined to that, I think the former administration, this administration has had a focus on closing the social gap. You mentioned some of the statistics. We have now a much larger social opportunities in the country, but also in pure economic terms, we have a much larger middle class, which was very instrumental during the 2008-2009 global crisis. So this is an important feature that we didn't have in the past, and now it's there in Brazil, a sizable consumer mass for the country. We also have now a well-articulated program of rebuilding infrastructure. I think Luciano Coutinho will speak about that. But we have some very hard constraints in terms of benchmarks. We have, as you mentioned, the World Cup in 2014, the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro in 2016. We have to develop the oil fields of the pre-salt. So we have some important investment to be made in infrastructure in Brazil, and we're going to have to deliver on that. So that's another important area. And the fourth area, I think we have a very solid financial system. We have invested a lot, restructured the system in the 1990s. We have invested a lot in very strict prudential regulation. We have intense financial supervision. So that has been a strength of the Brazilian economy these days. So this is the kind of Brazil we're dealing with today. And this explains how Brazil has responded to this 2008-2009 world financial crisis. I mean, we have, for the first time in many years, been able to adopt counter-cyclical macro policies to respond to this huge shock. And the results were clear. I mean, we had the kind of V-shaped type recovery. And now we are in a situation that we have emerging markets in Brazil ahead of the pack, growing at significant rates. We have to deal with abundancy. We have too much demand today. We have too much capital flowing in, and we have to use our framework and deliver. From the central bank perspective, our overriding objective is monetary stability. Delivering monetary stability within this framework, which is well known, the inflation targeting framework. And I think we have the instruments to do that. We have already tightened financial and monetary conditions. We are addressing the issue of inflation, which is related to commodity price shocks, and we have a very tough second half of 2010 in that regard. We are dealing with that. That's not a huge problem. We are within our target range, but we are committed to deliver and to anchor inflation in Brazil. And how to do that with capital flows? We have to have an enlarged toolkit. And we are doing that because we have two objectives. The first one is monetary stability. The second one is securing financial stability. How do we do that? We have to put in place sound macroprudential policies, as we've done. We have to address the issue of excessive appreciation of one important asset, which is the exchange rate, and we are doing that because we don't want to take advantage of this, which is to be a temporary issue. It has to do with the global environment, with excess liquidity, with lack of flexibility of the exchange rate in some important areas. So the burden share of Brazil has been high, and we are addressing with a number of tools to secure monetary stability and to make sure that financial stability is not put in risk. I think those are my first remarks.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that we will have more opportunity to discuss some of the challenges. And I welcome Minister Antonio Patriota. Welcome, glad to have you here. Let me go to finish the economic macro performance, then I'm going to ask you to give us a sense of Brazilian foreign policy, and then we'll go to some specific with others. And so, Luciano Coutinho Benedes, I wanted to ask you two things. One is Benedes. Another of the Brazilian miracles is that how well it rode the financial crisis at a time in which governments were falling right and left, and in Europe and elsewhere, and crashes of all kinds were happening. The Brazilian economy was steady, it was sustained, and Benedes played a very important counter-cyclical role. Tell us, what was it, and give us some sense of the order of magnitudes of your intervention at that time.
Well, I think that's the importance of having a efficient public bank system. It was not just our BNDES, but also the other two federal banks, Banco do Brasil and Caixa. But in our case, we added at least 2.5 percentage points of GDP in extra investment in 2009. So that was an efficient counter-cyclical policy, because this was a policy that supported investment. And also, it was efficient because it was mainly infrastructure. So that was the correct way of addressing. It is also efficient way because you support, through long-term credit, you support investment, and from the standpoint of the Treasury, this is more efficient than direct expenditures, because the money comes back when you finance in a long term. So this was a wiser and more efficient way to be counter-cyclical. And in our case, we're able to double in 2 years our operations, because we had counter-cyclical funding from the Treasury. We have stable funding, institutional sources, that's the unemployment fund, but we had counter-cyclical action. Now, we to be counter-cyclical, you have to be strong when the crisis is sharp, and you have to retreat or withdraw when the recovery comes. So now it's time to moderate our expansion. So this year we will be very moderate. Maybe we stabilize this year. And I think the mix of macro policy for Brazil, to be very brief, is to moderate consumption, to moderate credit to consumption, which has already been taken the initiative, to moderate governmental expenditures, particularly current expenditures, and to support investment on the other side. So support investment in order to raise the aggregate investment capital formation to GDP. That's what Brazil needs. We have to moved from 19 towards 23 to 24% as the aggregate savings and investment ratio for the Brazilian economy. So we have an adjustment year. This year we will moderate growth. This is a necessary move in order to keep inflation under control. And we will have a much closer coordination between fiscal and monetary policy and also public credit policy. We will be very closely coordinated in order to achieve the goals of maintaining stability and also maintaining the growth potential of Brazil.
Thank you.
That's to be brief.
Minister Patriota, President Dilma Rousseff has insisted about the continuity in a lot of areas, that her government will be essentially a government of continuity and deepening some of the efforts and trying to redouble the achievements. But I wanted to ask you about areas of discontinuity in foreign policy. Will there be anything that will be different? Will there be areas that you're going to be doing different in the next few years in terms of your international postures?
Well, thank you, Moises. And first of all, I think it is important to establish what is meant by continuity. During the past 8 years, we have developed enhanced relations with our immediate neighborhood. So that has involved not only strengthening our bilateral relations with Argentina, but also placing great emphasis on Mercosur. And last year, 2010, we had 2 very productive Mercosur summits in San Juan, Argentina, and then Foz do Iguaçu, Brazil. So that is the matrix for our efforts to promote South American integration. And of course, UNASUR has been of the highest importance to increase political dialogue, economic coordination, to promote projects in areas such as infrastructure, energy, and others. And of course, when you look at South America, it is a democratic region where all countries are grappling with models of economic growth that will promote social inclusion, perhaps with different levels of success, but there certainly are many success stories. And it is also a very interesting and well-endowed area because it's self-sufficient in energy, in food production, in water resources. So an extraordinary potential for all these countries, and the emphasis will not change. We will continue attributing great importance to these relationships. The fact that President Dilma Rousseff will be traveling on Monday to Buenos Aires illustrates precisely what the discontinuity means. Now, what I've been saying, and it doesn't represent a rupture with the past, is that enhancement of relations among countries in South America and the global outreach that has also characterized our foreign policy during the past 8 years does not take place to the detriment of relations with the developed North. And perhaps an indication of this is the fact that President Dilma will be meeting very soon with President Obama. He will be visiting Brazil in the month of March. And I was just in Brussels before coming here to Davos, where I met with the European Union leadership, with President Van Rompuy, with Baroness Ashton, with Durão Barroso, the President of the European Commission. So we will work on many fronts, highlighting our relationship with our neighbors, but without neglecting other regions of the world or discriminating between levels of development. During the past years, we have increased the number of our embassies worldwide by more than 40 new embassies. Many of these are in Africa and the Middle East and Central Asia. So to a certain extent, the challenge is to consolidate this global presence and to find a narrative for these different regions, which is something that will also be present in my agenda personally. Where does one identify changes? Well, in the first place, the country that has been bequeathed to the government of Dilma Rousseff is a very different country from the one President Lula inherited in 2003. So to a certain extent, we can be more ambitious, not only in terms of the human resources we have at our disposal, or the embassies, or the relationships that we have managed to establish, the coalitions that we have managed to establish. Just before coming here, I was meeting with India, China, South Africa to coordinate on matters of common interest. There will be a BRICS summit this year. There is the IBSA trilateral group that brings together the 3 largest multi-ethnic democracies in the developing world, Brazil, South Africa, and India, and so on. So this will continue to be part of the agenda in a perhaps more favorable environment for Brazil to undertake diplomatic activity. One area where I think perhaps greater emphasis will be placed is on promoting more inclusive, more democratic and representative global governance. Because although very important changes have taken place in the past few years, such as in the transition from the G8 to the G20, or the mechanisms that are being established for coordination on climate change and environmental issues, this is still an unfinished job. So we need to work harder for United Nations reform, for Security Council reform, and for creating the mechanisms that will allow us to have the kind of global governance that reflects the geopolitics of the 21st century.
Thank you, Minister Patriota. Let me go to Freddy Curado. Embraer is another miracle. Who would have said that out of a country in Latin America you would have a company that was a world leader in a high technology sector like aerospace? And Embraer is a leader in many segments of the aerospace industry. So how do you respond to how the private sector and how corporations in Brazil react to this context that has been given to us?
Well, the companies are an integral part of the society, and clearly the Brazilian society voted tens of millions of people for continuity. In macroeconomy, in the social improvement, as you have mentioned, we broke the vicious circle of, well, you have to get enough wealth to distribute, but you never get there. So I think we broke this in the last years, and clearly this created actually a very positive momentum as people came upwards in the society. You know, more consumption came along, and obviously development came with that. So that's one of the reasons why the economy was so resilient through the crisis. Do we have challenges? Absolutely. Do we have risks? Yes. It's already mentioned here today, you know, the risk of inflation. The central bank has had a very firm policy in that respect. I think this has been fundamental for the country. I also see some risk in terms of the external accounts. Of course, we are enjoying a good moment of a price of basic products. We do have a challenge in terms of a broader and longer-term industrial policy in the country. Education is another front which has been addressed over several years and has to continue. So overall, I think we live a very positive moment. I think we live a convergence of ideas and understanding. And a very positive thing, to be brief, is that all the items which are either risks or challenges are clearly known and identified and spoken of by the government. So they're not shying away from those issues. Quite the contrary, they are indicating that they're going to address them. So it's a positive view from the private sector.
Thank you. Let me move from the private sector to subnational governance. Renato Villela, you manage the finances of a very large state, and tell us the context for that, and tell us also the challenges.
Okay. Thank you. Just to put a little bit in context, Rio has about 15 million inhabitants and a GDP of $185 billion, which is about 10% of Brazilian GDP. It explains how we not only were fully benefited from the impressive economic performance of recent years and the impressive economic fundamentals, but also we are part of it. Also, Rio is a natural and fantastic logistic platform. It's located, the capital is located within a 500 kilometers area that encloses 65% of Brazilian GDP. We have 6 ports, another part is in build. We have the roads. We are getting further investments in improving the logistical areas. Rio is also the energy capital of Brazil. The state produces more energy than consumes. So in terms of security for foreign investors, it's a very good place to be because we have plenty of supply of energy there. And to take advantage of both the economic performance of Brazil and the natural endowments of Rio, we have been doing some hard homework in the last 4 years. We performed a major overhaul on our public finance. We performed a fiscal shift of about $2.5 billion in 4 years, which is about 15% of our budget, from a huge deficit to a sizable surplus. We recovered a capacity to borrow, capacity to sustainably borrow, even under the very stringent rules on supranational debt that prevail in Brazil. And BNDES is one of our partners in that endeavors. So as you mentioned in the beginning, we got 10 months ago an investment grade from Standard & Poor's. And what I'd like to stress is that this major fiscal turnaround came about alongside with a huge improvement in both quality and quantity of public services in key areas. In public security, we were able to increase in 62% the number of policemen in the streets of the state of Rio. We were able to establish key points of pacifying police stations on the most violent areas in the metropolitan region. In the transportation area, we are very focused on improving and increasing our metropolitan transportation system, and with a focus on railroads, which is and also in making it more rational use of fuel oil, and then increasing, have a positive impact on the environment. In the health sector, we completely changed the landscape in Rio. We invested heavily in new and more modern health units, and also modernizing and bring back to the state of the art a lot of state health units. That was a big investment on social area that we were able to do. And bear in mind, that's alongside a major fiscal restructuring. For the big events that we have under the World Cup Finals in 2014 and the Olympic Games in 2016, and also the Federation Cup and others, big events that we hope will come to Rio, we have some challenges to meet. More transportation, because people have to move during these events, and people still have to move after the events. The population will have to move. This is one of the legacies of the Olympic Games. We have some challenges on the environmental area. It's a commitment of Rio to clean up the Guanabara Bay. For those who know Rio, know that it's a big challenge, but it's going to be a big improvement in terms of quality of life for the city, for the metropolitan area as a whole. We have also a challenge of setting up and for ameliorating the tourism infrastructure. It's going to be there for the Olympic Games, and it's going to be there for the years ahead. So, to summarize, we have the challenges, big challenges to meet, but we have the drive, we have the means, and we have the capability, the capacity to coordinate the efforts of all relevant partners, the federal government, the municipal governments, and most of all,
the private investors.
Thank you, Secretary Vilela. Vikram Pandit, you run a global, large financial corporation. Tell us how you and your colleagues and competitors are looking at Brazil. And mostly what I want to hear is, what do you worry when you worry about Brazil? What are the things that may not be as perfectly aligned as you would wish that they were?
Well, let me, first of all, start by congratulating everybody else on this panel. You've done an outstanding job over the last so many years. Fiscal discipline, financial discipline, monetary policy, entrepreneurship. I mean, this is a success story, and it's no wonder that Brazil has the world's confidence. And, it's a critical period. You got the World Cup coming up and the Olympics coming up. But just one small vignette, as I just go around these events here at Davos and talk to my clients and talk to the people who have money, the sovereign wealth funds, and they've increased their frequency of visits to Brazil. And not only that, everybody's trying to figure out how to become part of the growth that Brazil represents going forward. So anything I'm going to talk about, I put in the category of high-class problems. And that, I guess, in itself is a problem in some ways that you have to look at, in the sense it is a critical period for Brazil, and it provides the opportunity to set up for the next stage of growth. There is no question that Brazil is blessed with resources. 25% of the land in Brazil is arable. You've got 18% of the world's fresh water. You've got natural resources, right from oil to iron ore and all of that, and that creates a number of different opportunities. And so everybody's trying to figure out how to fund Brazil's $150 billion plus a year infrastructure spending, and BNDES does such a good job, and they're so efficient that that's a great start. But we'd like all to join along with that and say, can we fund what's going on in Brazil? I think that's an important opportunity. Almost every multinational in the world looks at the rising middle class in Brazil. You look at the 200 million consumers and say, how can I be part of that market? And of course, with what's happening with food prices, and everybody looks at Brazil as being one of the suppliers, major suppliers of agricultural products, for that matter, protein, around the world. That's a big opportunity. But I guess the biggest change that I see, and we see, and we're in 109 countries as a bank, and most of those countries are emerging markets. The biggest change that's occurring out there that we see is the linkage between the emerging markets. If you look at trade flow, capital flows, multinational cooperation, investments on any dimension, the trade and the linkage between Asia, Latin America, Africa, when you look at all those EM, that linkage is rising exponentially, which creates a special kind of opportunities for emerging market companies to be in Brazil or Brazilian multinationals being elsewhere. I think the biggest challenge we see is really about the mechanisms of bringing in the funding that's available around the world into Brazil. And while Brazil has well-developed capital markets, well-developed stock markets, a small amount of volume can get those stock prices up, and it almost crowds out everything beyond that. The prices reach to such a level that while there is a lot of ability and willingness to bring capital in, it stops right there. And the real thrust has to be about how do you structurally think about the capital markets in Brazil, and how do you structurally think about attracting long-term capital, and there's a lot available. And whether it's by creating a domestic currency debt market for domestic companies, or having a more well-regulated mortgage industry, right, that can create the kind of product that's interesting for foreign investors. I mean, these are all the kind of things that are important, and working alongside BNDES, I mean, I think are important. What you're seeing is, as a result of that difficulty, the money is flowing into the short term. Okay, it's the most convenient way of earning those real rates of return in Brazil. And you know, a lot of that is actually fundamentally people trying to be part of Brazil's growth story. But as a banker, looking at what's happening around the world, the amount of money that's available, the people who are trying to invest in growth stories, and what others are doing around the world, we think there's an opportunity here, and the opportunity is to turn this short-term funding into long-term funding, and if we can do it in the right way, and that's a very sort of a virtual kind of a process because it can support the infrastructure development. Because ultimately, I mean, most of the emerging markets today are supply constrained. I mean, they're run out of capacity. You're seeing that. And if anything we can do to move that supply curve to the right in the emerging markets is a good thing. And you're going to find international businesses and international funds and capital extremely willing to work with Brazil as they try to move the supply curve out to the right.
Thank you very much. And so this has been a very comprehensive...
Can I make a comment?
Of course.
Just on that, because it's very appropriate. I think Vikram absolutely right. We launched at the end of last year a package of incentives for long-term private credit in one side and for long-term capital market instruments, particularly corporate bonds, that were granted a much lighter tax treatment, lighter reserve requirements, and also open up to foreign investors. So we expect that the private capital market and banking system will crowd in and help us support finance for investment. What we need to attract foreign capital is attract foreign capital for supporting investment and not for producing an asset bubble, etc. So we are absolutely in fine-tuning with Vikram has just said. So we have already taken initiative. In this coming month, we should coordinate with the market and the private system to know how well those measures are working, and if we need be, we will improve them. But what we need and what we aim to is that we will moderate BNDES this year, will be stable to open up space for the private sector.
Thank you, Luciano. So we have some time left for you all. So please raise your hands, those of you that have comments or suggestions or questions. The gentleman over there, please.
Question goes to Minister Patriota.
And tell us who you are, please. Yes. Identify yourself.
Hélio Mater, I'm president of the Acatu Institute for Conscious Consumption in Brazil. Question to Mr. Patriota about what will be... Well, Brazil had a strong position in Nagoya in the negotiations of the biodiversity, and I congratulate you on that. What will be the position of Brazil in other negotiations related to environmental sustainability towards the future, please?
No, let's take several.
Take several questions.
Yes,
Okay.
if you don't mind. There, yeah.
Brazil is really a remarkable turnaround story, and there are many impressive things that are going on in the economy. And Brazil is increasingly seen as an international player, and international players have some responsibility. Brazil is a signatory of the Democratic Charter, and the Democratic Charter in the Americas is being grossly violated. Now, Brazil has remained silent vis-à-vis all those violations of the International Charter, the Democratic Charter, and its silences have been very particular. Brazil remained silent when evidence of Venezuelan support of FARC became public. But Brazil did not remain silent when Colombia signed a military agreement with the US, immediately calling an emergency meeting of UNASUR. Brazil remained silent when Venezuela responded to the news about its support of FARC by closing down the border with Colombia and closing down trade with Colombia, which is an act of war and in violation of WTO. Brazil actually responded by organizing business missions to take away Colombian market share in Venezuela. Brazil did not remain silent when a hunger striker died in Cuba. In fact, President Lula said that it's okay for hunger strikers to die because they're criminals. Brazil remained silent when the mayor of Caracas, who just won the election, had the whole government taken away by the government. But Brazil did not remain silent in Honduras, where it hosted the deposed president in its embassy in clear violation of asylum laws. So Brazil has been perceived as being a supporter of authoritarian regimes around it in violation of its commitments to the democratic charter. So going forward, should the citizens of Latin America and the world see Brazil as a member of the democratic community supporting democratic rights in its neighborhood, or should it see it as a supporter of authoritarian regimes such as Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran?
The lady here.
Hi, my name is Christine Balling. I'm a U.S. citizen. I live in Colombia, married to a Colombian senator. Maybe somewhat of a follow-up to what Mr. Hausman just said. I think in a positive way, Brazil now is positioned to, with this newfound success, the country has a greater ability to affect positive change in your region. And obviously, you know, there are those who would argue that traditionally the United States' involvement in the region in terms of promoting democracy, the economic involvement, has been seen as negative and positive, in part because there are those who would argue that the United States is a type of outsider. So now Brazil obviously is in a unique position to offer support to your fellow South American countries as an insider, as a cultural insider, et cetera, et cetera. And I think with your newfound power, you will find, or have found, of course, that you have a newfound responsibility to promote a strong democracy within the entire region. And I guess a question as to how you were thinking that you might assume that new role.
Thank you. Any other question? Here, please.
Well, Gilberto Marin from Mexico, and I just want to congratulate all of you because you have been doing a tremendous job on the Brazil Grow. And there is just one fact that always, in the past, I always asked to Mr. Lula, and it was, what about the fiscal reform? Because especially for foreigners doing business in Brazil, I have been there for 12 years, it's quite difficult, I think, to have all these different taxes between the states and all different control and regulations. So can we expect in the Dilma government to finally have a fiscal reform?
Thank you. Yeah.
Lourdes Casanova from INSEAD. My question is to BNDES. BNDES has helped many companies in Brazil, has saved many companies in Brazil during the crisis, taken very important positions. You were saying that now we are in another phase and BNDES will be retreating. So I was wondering what will be BNDES' role in this new phase of the economic growth. Will maintain those positions in having, as such, having a very important position of the government in those companies?
Thank you. Well, let's have another round, for closing remarks and reactions to the questions. I don't know who would like to start.
Very gladly. Well, you had asked me not to go beyond 5 or 6 minutes, so I'll try to compress a little bit here. But to begin with the environmental sustainability question, there's no doubt that Brazil is very well positioned today to continue assuming a leadership role in negotiations, whether they deal with biodiversity or climate change or other items in the environmental agenda. And this is because we are doing our homework, I think, internally. In first place, we have probably the cleanest energy matrix of any country of comparable size in the world, with more than 40% of our energy being from renewable sources. And I was mentioning last night at a dinner that the objectives set by President Obama in his State of the Union address have already been achieved in Brazil in terms of establishing a clean electricity matrix. And this, in addition to establishing very ambitious targets that have been internalized through legislation for reducing deforestation and other sources of emission of CO2, is a signal that we will remain very active on the multilateral front, while also trying to confront our internal challenges, which is something that I think also applies to human rights, which allows me for a little transition into the human rights debate. On the human rights front, there's no question that the more a country deals with its internal challenges, I think the more authority it will have internationally to participate in debates on human rights. And I think there are many examples of progress that have been made in the past few years, including through the establishment of special secretariats at ministerial level for human rights, broadly speaking, for gender issues, for promoting racial equality. But there's also no question that a lot more needs to be done, and I had a long meeting recently with the new Secretary for Human Rights, Maria do Rosário, during which she outlined what some of her priorities will be. The prison situation in Brazil is a very serious one. The fact that the main cause of death among young adults is through violent crime, also a very worrying and decapacitating situation that must be confronted head on. Now, on the international front, I think one of the questions here was very one-sided because, in fact, I think Brazil has been a very strong advocate for human rights and for democracy. The question of being silent or not is maybe one that is open to debate because I think our main concern is to see progress in specific situations. And if public silence can contribute to indirect channels that will lead to progress, then I'm all for silence in such situations. On the other hand, if condemnation and public disapproval will produce tangible results, well, in those cases, I think we can also assume such a tactic or such a strategy. The important thing is that human rights remains essential to Brazil in its identity and its current phase of history. We've paid a very high price to re-democratize, and our current leader, President Dilma Rousseff, suffered personally during the years of military dictatorship in prison under torture. So there's no question of how important this is to Brazil currently. When it comes to promoting democracy, well, we're strong believers in leading by example. And I think there's no question that Brazilian democracy has been maturing over the past few years. The fact that a woman should reach the presidency, I think, speaks about a society where we are making progress towards gender equality without minimizing the many challenges that still must be faced. But I would highlight one important aspect where I think Brazil deserves some credit, which is in establishing mechanisms that have contributed to diffusing tension and to dealing with very complex situations that could have degenerated into violent turmoil, turbulence, deaths, and very serious situations in our region. And I think the first obligation for a diplomat and for a foreign ministry is not to make matters worse. So UNASUR is a good example of this. Through the coordination among South American countries, we've been able, for example, to diffuse tensions in Bolivia internally that could have led to very serious conflict. Through the cooperation that has been enhanced by UNASUR, relations between Venezuela and Colombia have improved greatly. And I thought that the reference to our relations with Colombia and Venezuela were particularly one-sided, because if there's one thing that the Brazilian government has done in the past years is to develop very close ties with every single neighboring government, irrespective of ideology or foreign policy. And this was the case between President Lula and President Uribe. It's certainly the case now with President Manuel Santos, and we're very encouraged to see how the relations between Venezuela and Colombia are developing now. Another case in point is Haiti. Haiti, where Brazil has placed not only how do you say this in English, has put its money where its mouth is, or has assumed greater responsibilities in promoting stability, but also in encouraging institutional and political progress. I won't go into the details of the situation right now going on in Haiti, but there's no question that we're working, and I believe working effectively, with a number of partners, including the United States and the OAS, and in whichever way we can, to ensure that a electoral process that could have derailed very easily reach its conclusion in stability and allow the Haitian people to choose a successor to President Préval. I think these are some examples of how we will remain committed. If maybe I'm allowed to make one last comment, I met yesterday with the representative of Amnesty International here at Davos. I also met with the president of Switzerland, Micheline Calmire, and we've discussed ways in which to work together, on one hand with NGOs, on another hand with a variety of governments, in order to promote less selective, less politicized debates on human rights in a variety of fora, including the Human Rights Council.
Thank you, Minister Patriota. Let's continue. I have to warn us all that we just have a very, very short time, so I will ask you to please be brief in your final remarks.
Let me make one comment, and I know the governor said this, finance minister as well, the concept of financial inclusion. And I've got to say, as a bank who's been involved in financial inclusion in about 100 countries around the world, where we work with the last mile providers of financial services, Brazil is further along than many countries in thinking about financial inclusion. And one of the things that is exciting to people around the world is that part of the platform is opportunity to all, and to bring along everybody. And I say that from the perspective that there's been a lot of progress made over the last so many years in increasing the middle class and bringing up the levels of living, but we see a commitment to that, and that's a positive from an investment perspective.
Thank you very much. Alexander.
Okay. Yes, this is a very important issue for us at the Central Bank, not only to create the opportunities, to give opportunities for people in terms of social inclusion, but also increasing the levels of bancarization in Brazil will do also good for our traditional job of using monetary policy to control inflation. I mean, the more the people are financially integrated, not only from the credit perspective, but also from the deposit side, we believe that our policies will tend to be more effective going forward. I'm not the tax authority here and don't speak for tax issues, but since the colleague from Mexico raised the issue, I think there is a good chance for a tax reform, not a fiscal reform. I think we're well in terms of our fiscal framework, but as far as tax reform is concerned, I think there is a good chance to make concrete progress in this new administration.
Thank you. Freddy.
Yeah, just to add on this tax reform, I suppose fiscal, you mean the tax for the corporate tax, it's clearly an issue in Brazil, not only the high tax, about the complexity and some, even trying to do right, sometimes it's sometimes contradictory. It's a clear commitment from the government to address that, from Mrs. Rousseff herself. We just have to be fair that this is not just under the power of the executive office. There's several things that have to go to Congress, so it's a rather complex issue. I understand that some more executive actions will be taken more immediately, but the rest of the whole issue is complicated. Just one point to finalize. Beyond that, there is a clear, intention to really make the business atmosphere in Brazil more friendly. For example, incentive to innovation, integration between the government and the private sector in the dialogue. The package that Mr. Coutinho just mentioned was actually was not 4 hands, but probably 16 hands in the bank, Febraban, the IED, in several institutions supporting the government and vice versa in that package. GE and IBM just decided to place innovation centers or research centers in Brazil. So I think that the direction is quite clear. There are challenges, but the hope is that they will be addressed.
Thank you. Luciano.
Well, to answer the question about BNDES in the future, I think well, we will not retreat from very long durations because the market will be insufficient to that. So infrastructure, economic, energy, social infrastructure, innovation in which the market usually fails to promote, and poverty reduction, which is one of the major guidelines of President Dilma Rousseff for social policy. And of course, we will also support capital-intensive sectors in which also longer durations are necessary. On the other hand, we will diminish the coverage we offer to shorter durations in all industries and services and sectors in which duration is shorter. We will diminish the coverage we offer from our credit lines, such as to open up space for the private sector. We hope that private bonds, corporate bonds, and financial bonds of 5 to 7 years duration will develop very sharply this year, and then will help us to finance the increase of the investment ratio of Brazil. That's the strategy.
Thank you. Renato.
I will make a brief comment on the tax reform issue. It's unquestionable that it's a big interest of all Brazil, both federal governments, subnational governments, and private sector. The point is that it's not only a tax issue. It's about fiscal federalism. It's about not only about taxes, about state taxes, and it's about the system transfers. So it's a very complex problem. So we have never been so close to solve it in the next constituency of President Lula, and I think we have already advanced a lot. And I'm hopeful that we could solve this conundrum soon. But there's no such a thing as a simple solution for a complex problem. So we have to start and continue to deal with that, to look at the numbers, to look at the facts. So I'm very positive about and optimistic about tax reform. But it's a challenge, it's a Brazilian challenge, and we are looking into it. Just to finish, for me, this is a very interesting discussion solutions. I hope people to see all of you at the end of April in Rio. We are hosting the Latin America session of the World Economic Forum. So the weather in Rio is always good, but in April it's especially good. See you there.
So I spoke about the many miracles of Brazil, and I have another miracle to add, and that is that a session on Latin America ends on Swiss time. We are concluding in the time allotted. This is just a preamble of a larger conversation that will continue in Rio de Janeiro. There is no doubt that the Brazilian miracles will continue, and we wish you good luck and congratulations for a great job done until now. Thank you.